Hi, everyone. Welcome again. My name is Melissa Kane, and I am the Vice President of BigTentUSA. At Big Tent, we are steadfast in our commitment to defending our democratic values, our Constitution, and the rule of law. Our goal is to empower with facts, guidance, and calls to action so that we can all become stronger, more effective advocates. And now it is my great pleasure to be able to introduce two men who truly are the front line in the fight to enforce the rule of law and protect our personal freedoms in this country, really at all times, but especially now. Attorney General Rob Bonta is the 34th Attorney General of the state of California. He's the first person of Filipino descent and the second Asian American to occupy the position. Prior to being sworn in as Attorney General Bonta served in the State Assembly and as a Deputy City Attorney for the City and County of San Francisco, where he represented the city and county and its employees and fought to protect Californians from exploitation and racial profiling. Born in Quezon City, Philippines, Attorney General Bonta immigrated to California with his family as an infant. He is the son of a proud native Filipino mother and a father who taught him the value of public service to his community. He is married to Mia Bonta, and they are the proud parents of 3 children, Reina, Ileana, and Andres. Attorney General William Tong is the 25th Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, currently serving his second term. He grew up working side by side with his Chinese immigrant parents in their family's restaurant, and he is the first Chinese American to be elected Attorney General nationwide. Attorney General Tong practiced for 18 years as a litigator in both state and federal courts, and in 2006, he became the first Asian American elected to any state office in Connecticut history. He served for 12 years as a representative in the Connecticut General Assembly, where he served as House Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and he helped lead the state's efforts on many critical laws, including gun violence. Attorney General Tong serves as Eastern Region Chair and Finance Chair of the National Association of Attorneys General, as well as on the Executive Committee of the Democratic Attorneys General Association. He and his wife Elizabeth live in Stamford, Connecticut with their 3 children and many pets. And moderating the conversation tonight is our good friend and partner, Michael Waldman. Michael is president and CEO of the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law, a nonpartisan law and policy institute that works to improve systems of democracy and justice so they work for all. Michael is a constitutional lawyer and writer who's an expert on the presidency and American democracy, and he has been leading the Brennan Center since 2005. AG Tong and Michael, welcome to Big Tent. I know we're waiting on AG Bonta, but I'm guessing he will be here in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to turn it over to you for now, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you to everybody at Big Tent, and thank you to all of you for being part of this community of concern and action at a time of real challenge and real crisis for our country. I think we all share that view. You know, at the founding, Thomas Paine wrote, "In America, the law is king." And we are finding out whether that is still true. We all know that there has been an assault on the rule of law from the first minutes of this new administration, that there have been attacks on institutions of civil society, from universities to law firms to states to people and institutions that serve those people, that have broken rules, pushed the boundaries, exceeded the constitutional order in all kinds of different ways. It is a great legal struggle going on right now in the courts and elsewhere over the power of the presidency, and this vast attempt to expand the power of the presidency, and the power of the federal government vis-a-vis the states and vis-a-vis all the rest of us. We are living through consequential times, and the rule of law is at stake, and the role of state attorneys general is central right now to what is happening. Last year, as some of you may remember, the Brennan Center engaged in some scenario planning exercises with former government officials, former members of the cabinet, former members of Congress, military officers, state officials, and others, to kind of role play what an authoritarian president might do and how there might be responses. And some of what we found in this Democracy Futures project, as we called it, was disquieting, that there were certain things that really were not going to provide the kind of checks and balances, the kind of pushback against abuse of power that the framers envisioned or that we might want. We were actually somewhat skeptical about the courts and have been encouraged by how many courts have acted. But it was clear even then that the states, and in particular the law enforcement officers of the states, have a distinct, a specific, a powerful role to play as an independent bulwark for protection of freedom and protection of equality. We are very fortunate to have with us today, as we've heard, two of the leaders in that effort, leaders in their own state and leaders nationwide in a broad and cooperative effort among and between state attorneys general and with civil society organizations, legal organizations, and others, all working along, at the very least, parallel lines to make sure that, when possible, that the rule of law is followed. And we are going to be joined, as you know, by Attorney General Bonta from California, and a number of the questions that are front of mind have to do with the deployment of the military inside the United States for purposes that go well beyond what the military is supposed to be deployed for. And so when Attorney General Bonta arrives, we'll have very specific questions for him, especially about what's been going on in Los Angeles, in California's response to the deployment of the National Guard and the Marines. But this is an issue that extends far beyond California, and where folks like Attorney General Tong have been thinking ahead about what might be the problems. So I'll start, if I could, Attorney General, with some broad questions. And I know you've been engaged in this legislatively in Connecticut as well as other things. The military, broadly speaking, is not supposed to be used within the United States except under very limited circumstances. The posse comitatus law, and we will do our very best to minimize the use of Latin in this conversation, but it will come up every once in a while. The posse comitatus law is a very important law going back many years that says the military cannot be used for police work, for things that are not appropriate for a military to do, although there are some exceptions. Those exceptions are being tested in California right now. I would ask you, as a broad matter, what should we be worried about with the use of the military? How has it been used in a way that raises concerns for you? And what kinds of things are you doing in Connecticut, or more broadly, can states do to protect appropriately against the overreach and abuse that could come from inappropriate use of the military?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael, and thanks for hosting us again, Big Tent, and Melissa. Melissa's like 20 minutes up the road from me, so this is a bit of an inside job that she has her attorney general on this Zoom call. And Rob Bonta, don't tell anyone in California, but he spent 11 years in New Haven, playing soccer, going to college, and going to law school. So he's a bit of a native of Connecticut. So a little hometown shout out. And Michael, I know you're about like an hour away too, so we might as well just gotten together in the same room. Let me also say, if I may, Michael, you said a couple things in your intro that I think will inform the discussion tonight, and that is about states and attorneys general, and how attorneys general are more front and center now than we've ever been, how states are more front and center than we've ever been, and in how we're juxtaposed against the federal government. But I think it's really important to take a step back right now and remember that there's a reason for that. There's a reason why AGs in states are so important right now, especially in a dangerous moment like this. And that is because this country is a federation of states. We are not one monolithic nation. I mean, we are a nation, but we're not one single nation, city, state. We are a collection, a federation of 50 sovereign states joined together by our consent in a federation known as the United States of America. Michael, you know this, and your law students know this, but sometimes it's important to remind people that the original building blocks of this country and the entities and the people that hold the power in this country are states. States are sovereign. And so when William Tong steps into court, when Rob Bonta steps into court, I don't step into court as William Tong. I step into court as the sovereign state of Connecticut. And so does Rob. And that is why when states assert their power through their attorneys general, we're doing it. We're asserting our original sovereign power, which is where all the power in this country comes from. And we delegated limited powers to the federal government. So to answer your question, right, it makes sense then that generally power over the National Guard is exercised by the states and by governors. And we delegated to the federal government limited circumstances in which the president can step in and commandeer those forces. They can't do it under posse comitatus. They can't use the National Guard and the military to enforce criminal law. The reason why we use Latin words is because it's such a foundational principle, right? It goes back a long way. But then there are certain emergency circumstances in which the president can act and commandeer National Guard forces. One of them is if he declares an emergency under the Insurrection Act. He has not done that, okay, affirmatively, because that triggers a whole bunch of other issues and is a very profound act. He did it under another federal statute. And I don't want to steal General Bonta's thunder because he's in the middle of this fight right now. But basically, in order to invoke the powers that he invoked, he's got to demonstrate that there is an emergency based on a rebellion or an invasion. And there was no rebellion and there was no invasion in Los Angeles, warranting the use of presidential power to commandeer the National Guard and take control of them and deploy them in the streets. So we all went to court. Rob went to court right away. And then we, Democratic Attorney General, rallied around him, and we joined him in court as amici, and we won at district court level. We've won a lot of cases at district court level across this country in the past couple of months, but it gets harder as you go up, and it got hard in the Ninth Circuit. And I'll let him talk about where we are in the Ninth Circuit, in the district court, and probably in the Supreme Court at some point soon.
And, I think this is an important point. The last thing you said for the folks on this call to understand, there's been tremendous enthusiasm over the rulings in upwards of 150 trial courts around the country against these lawless actions.
Yeah.
Injunctions to slow, to stop, to limit these actions. And now these cases, in many instances, move to the appeals court level and the Supreme Court. And as everybody knows, that gets a lot harder because those courts, among other things, are more political. They're more doctrinaire. And we have seen the Supreme Court, among other things, as well as some of the courts of appeals, go out of their way to avoid taking a strong stand or reversing some of these lower court cases. But I want to welcome to this conversation Attorney General Rob Bonta of California. We're grateful to have you here, and we have begun by talking about the really important and particular role of states and state attorneys general in standing up for federalism and the rule of law and the Constitution, but in particular, the protection against the improper use of the military domestically. And of course, we all know California is literally on the front lines. Sadly, it is not a metaphor, hackneyed metaphor, but an actual description of this issue. As everybody knows, President Trump federalized the National Guard troops and also used Marines to deal with protests in Los Angeles around immigration policy and immigration raids. The Secretary of Homeland Security said this was to liberate Los Angeles from its leadership as a purpose. You, of course, have been in the middle of this. How's it going? And in particular, could you tell us why the state of California challenged what the federal government and President Trump's administration was doing, and what you see the course of that case to be?
Absolutely. And let me just say first, thank you to BigTentUSA. Thanks, Michael. Wonderful to be here with my great friend, Attorney General William Tong. I had some technical difficulties, so I was on as a participant, and I heard him talking about what he often likes to talk about as me being a resident of Connecticut for multiple years, which I proudly was. And I loved living in New Haven and work in Hartford, and I work with children there. AG Tong definitely represents the second best state in the nation. But I'm grateful to be here, and just high level, I couldn't be more proud of the Democratic AGs fighting these important fights, upholding the rule of law, democracy, protecting rights, protecting freedoms, going to court frequently. Unfortunately, not because we want to, but because we must, and because that's how often the law and the Constitution is being broken and violated 27 times now in 22 weeks, more than once a week. And we will continue. If Trump and Stephen Miller, who often complains about this, want courts to stop ruling against them, the answer is stop breaking the damn law. And if you don't want us to sue you in court, stop breaking the law. When you stop breaking the law, we'll stop suing. But if you keep breaking the law, we'll keep suing. And it is what is required and what is necessary to uphold the principles of our democracy. And you asked about the military's deployment in California. And obviously, it's very disturbing. It's very concerning. It's also unnecessary, counterproductive, provocative, in a moment where neither the governor nor the mayor wanted the National Guard to be deployed. The commander-in-chief of the National Guard most of the time of the California National Guard is the California governor, Governor Newsom, and he did not deploy them. They were not necessary. There were, of course, protests that included some agitators. There definitely was violence and vandalism, and that is nothing we haven't seen before. We have crime-fighting agencies, the largest sheriff's department in the nation, the third largest police department in the nation, LAPD and LA sheriffs, who are very well equipped with the men and women and resources training to handle these situations. These were nothing out of the ordinary in terms of things that we've seen before. But Trump deployed the National Guard under a statute that requires the existence of a rebellion or an invasion or the inability of the federal government to enforce the federal laws with the statute says the regular forces. And none of those things were present. A federal trial judge said as much. That was what we argued. And meanwhile, and so there were 4,000 National Guard troops that were deployed to California, to LA, and then 700 Marines. And then the Marines operate under a different statute. They're governed by posse comitatus, which basically says the military cannot be used to enforce for civilian law enforcement. And so we went to court to prevent the militarization of LA. And we won in front of a trial judge. Our North Star is following the law, following the Constitution. The Trump can do many things with his executive authority. He did win the election. He has great power, perhaps the most powerful elected position in certainly the nation and maybe the world. But he often wants to try to seize power that's not his and exercise power that doesn't belong to him. And so our job is to make sure that he is checked when he tries to overreach, as we believe he did here. The federal government, as they often do, appealed immediately, like within hours, and a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit stayed the lower court's order pending the appeal. So the lower court order that we secured, arguing that, which held that the deployment of the military was unconstitutional and unlawful statutorily, that's being stayed, unfortunately, for now. We continue to press our case. We continue to believe we'll prevail. There was a moment in time that the factual record was prepared when we went to court. There have been more facts that have evolved since then in terms of the exercise of the authority of the Marines and the National Guard, and we intend to conduct additional discovery and continue to press our case forward. So this is something that we saw, by the way, coming. The Democratic AGs have been ready. We've been preparing for months prior to the election of President Trump, in between the period when he was elected and inaugurated, and we were ready for invocation of deployment of the National Guard, potential invocation of the Insurrection Act. This is all something that was sent to us in writing in the form of Project 2025 that we've been ready for. So we will continue to press our case. We, like many cases, sometimes you win at one level and you take a setback at another level, but you continue. We continue to believe in the merits of our case, and that will prevail.
And of course, one of the great challenges here is that even if the constitutional imperatives are clear, often courts have been reluctant to step up in these matters. They have doctrines, non-justiciability, political question, other things of that nature. And the challenge is, as you all both said, if they weren't breaking the law so much, there wouldn't be so many lower court rulings. And one might not prefer that courts be having to adjudicate these things, but there are times when they can't just be raising their hand and saying, we prefer not to be involved. And that's especially going to be true at the Supreme Court when these cases get up there. You both described, before I turn to one of the other broad areas where you all both have been engaged, which is what states can do to address the dismantling of many federal agencies and freezing of federal funds, which of course affects states. You both described Democratic attorneys general. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of cooperation that's gone on, and is it in any way bipartisan? In other words, are there Republican attorneys general on these or any of these other issues that are willing to work with Democrats, or is it kind of polarized?
So the answer is not yet, and I often get asked, Mr. Attorney General, what do you need? What additional resources or help do you need? And I often say I need Republicans. I need my Republican colleagues to stand up and say that this is wrong, and to fight for their states as hard as we're fighting for our states. Because, if you recall, when the first round of NIH cuts were happening, United States Senator Katie Britt, who's a rising star from Alabama, said, hold on a second, those cuts are going to hurt the University of Alabama. Yes. Duh. And if you also recall, the federal funding freeze, the purported freeze of all federal funding, happened on the second Monday, and we sued by 5 o'clock on Tuesday. We were a little slow that day, Rob, but we'll blame New York. But we by the time we got to our lawsuit at 5 p.m., they had already pulled back that OMB memo that froze all federal funding. And I know why. Because that morning, Republican governors and senators and attorneys general called freaking out, saying, what are you doing? Because they need that money, frankly, more than blue states need that money. Red states are far greater takers of federal funding than blue states are. And so we need our Republican colleagues to stand up. So far, it hasn't happened. Democratic attorneys general talk constantly, and we're texting each other constantly. We're in close communication, and we talk several times a week. And it's not staff like Rob and I and Tish and Dana Nessel and Kwame Rowell. We're constantly one-on-one talking about these cases, talking about, we have to figure out a way into these issues. And we can talk about many of these funding freeze cases. But we have to have standing, we have to have good claims and defenses. We have to think through how we get in these cases. And it's a lot of creative, hardcore lawyering that we do. Our staffs obviously are very strong and they're bigger brains than ours in many cases, but we have to make these judgments and these decisions. So we could not be more coordinated, and it was happening almost a year before the election. The final thing I'll say, though, is, and Melissa got one thing wrong in my bio, but I'll forgive her, and that is I'm now the president-elect of the National Association of Attorneys General. And so I will take office in December. Why is that important? Because AGs, Democrats and Republicans, still work together on big cases. We still do a lot of work together. Those relationships are real. They're important. They're strained. No doubt they're strained right now. But in many ways, we're kind of the last corner of public life where Republicans and Democrats work together relatively well and are committed to it. And I think that's an important way that we can hold the union together.
Yeah, and I'll just add that there are definitely places and spaces where Democratic and Republican AGs have worked together, are working together right now.
Yeah, right now.
Signed on to letters when it comes to veterans benefits. We are in nearly every state, including red and blue states, are suing Meta for the harm to children on their platform. And so I don't want you to think there's never a time when we can work together. But the Republican AGs have been noticeably silent and quiet when it comes to the rights of their own people and the funding for their own states being unlawfully deprived and taken away, and those rights violated. And I have come to believe that they are secretly cheering on our lawsuits because they ride the coattails of them. They benefit from them. When we secure a nationwide injunction preventing the unlawful blocking of already congressionally appropriated funding to the tune of $3 trillion or NIH funding, red states benefit, and they benefit from our work. But it requires them to have conviction, commitment to principles, courage, and to not be what they've been. Unfortunately, they've been cowardly, they've been craven, they've been feckless, and they have not fought for their people. They have not done what they swore to do, which is uphold the laws and the Constitution and fight for the future of their people. So it's unfortunate, but it's a sad narrative of where we might be. They seem to be unwilling to, and maybe afraid of, crossing this president, even when he tramples over our most fundamental foundational document, our U.S. Constitution, or the laws that have been democratically passed to guide our society and create the rules of the road. So it's unfortunate, but maybe one of them, I continue to hold that hope, maybe one of them one day will have enough courage to join us in fighting for the rule of law and our Constitution.
And it is really striking. Once upon a time, I was the executive director of Public Citizens Congress Watch, which was at the time the largest consumer lobbying office in Washington, D.C. And the state attorneys general of both parties were strikingly united on issues of consumer protection, on issues of antitrust enforcement, tobacco, and many other issues over the years, where working together, it was some of the most powerful forces when the federal government especially was unwilling or unable to act. It's good to know that it's continuing in some realms. And of course, this is perhaps the most important right now, where we need that courage from all parties. Before we turn to the audience questions, and we're getting a lot of them, I do want to go a little deeper on the issues of the military deployment. And it has to do with the federalism questions. These federalism questions come up in all of these contexts. And just as states have their own independent sovereignty, of course, the federal government does as well. And there's limits to what states can do vis-a-vis the federal government. One of the questions that has been sent in is, we're all watching with alarm at the specter of ICE agents or other federal law enforcement agents stomping around the country, wearing masks to disguise themselves in plain clothes, so you don't really know who anybody is, and in a very performative way, arresting or seizing elected officials, seizing individual people for deportation and others, all sort of camera ready, and really in ways that abuse the law and that are unprecedented in a lot of respects. What kinds of power, if any, do states have to address these particular abuses of power from federal law enforcement agents, because they are federal employees, but they were operating in the real world in states. I know California is looking at this, and Connecticut may be as well, but how should folks who are not lawyers understand the role of the federal government, the role of states, and what states can do to protect our people?
Rob, you want me to start with this one?
Sure.
Go ahead, Rob. No, either way. Let me just say, it's for me, and I know for Rob as an immigrant himself, this is really personal and horrifying to see. For me, for example, not far from Worcester, Massachusetts, to see what happened there, see a mom and her daughter, renditioned off the street, right? Like as some sort of like horrible black ops, dark fantasy, right? Which I think is what people are living out in Washington, D.C. This is what I see from Tom Homan and others, and Stephen Miller, is sort of fantasy of a darker vision of our country. And it's very scary for those of us who are immigrants ourselves or come from immigrants. I know we all come from immigrants, but for some of us, it is more recent and more immediate. And we see ourselves in the people that are victimized. Here's the hard truth. The hard truth is, remember I said earlier, we're a federation of 50 sovereign states. We delegated limited powers to the federal government. One of those is immigration. And in a rational world, that makes sense, that foreign affairs, national security, immigration are handled by the federation. You asked the federalism question. Because the federation is better equipped to handle this on behalf of all of the states, and not by the states individually. And that works except when you have Donald Trump in office and Tom Homan in charge. And so there are limited ways that states can stop or push back on the ability of ICE to discharge its duties. And if they do so lawfully, they don't have to be nice about it, number one, and they can be very aggressive. And there's probably a wide latitude there. I think where the rubber meets the road is when they try to commandeer state and local resources to do their job. And that is a violation of our sovereignty, and it's a violation of the principles of federalism. And so in Connecticut, our law on these issues is called the Trust Act. And the Trust Act was not passed in response to Donald Trump. It was passed in response to secure communities under Barack Obama. And the Trust Act says basically to maintain trust between law enforcement, first responders, and people in Connecticut. We don't want people not to call the police if their house is getting broken into. We don't want people not to call the fire department if the house is on fire. And they may not call if they're worried that someone's going to rat them out based on their immigration status. And so that's why we say you can't use state and local law enforcement first responders to do immigration and customs enforcement, because people will be afraid to call the police. You've got to leave us out of it. You do your job. We delegated that authority to you. You have to follow law, respect constitutional rights. We'll go to court to stop you if you don't. But you do your job. Don't tell us to do your job for you. And that's what the law of Connecticut says. And I think a lot of states are wrestling with this question. The final thing I'll say is, some people use this word sanctuary. I think that is a entirely unhelpful word, okay, and an inaccurate word. Why? People say Connecticut, they describe Connecticut or cities in Connecticut as sanctuary places. And I say, what are you talking about? That's not true. Because there's no statute, there's no regulation that I'm aware of at the state level that says the word sanctuary. And it suggests things that aren't true. Number one, that we can protect everybody. That's not true. And number two is that we're acting somehow in defiance of federal law. Not true. So I think those words are unhelpful, but I think having laws that set clear boundaries between what the federal government can do and what states can do and required to do vis-a-vis immigration are important right now.
Thank you. I'll just add some here, some context, including A.G. Tong's statement about the fact that I was born in another country and I came here as an infant, as an immigrant. And my mom's from the Philippines. My dad and mom are both social justice activists and advocates. My dad marched and organized for voting rights and civil rights in Selma, Alabama, was in Brown Chapel AME Church when Martin Luther King Jr. came for an unannounced sermon. So listen to Martin in Selma in the civil rights movement. Both parents worked for the United Farm Workers of America. I grew up in the headquarters of La Paz there, but my dad worked in the front office with Cesar Chavez, my mom in the preschool with Dolores. And when I was born in the Philippines, my parents asked themselves if they could raise me and ensure that I was going to have freedom and democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. And their answer, unfortunately, was no. The dictator was coming. Ferdinand Marcos was on the rise. He was ascendant on his way to declaring martial law and his dictatorship. And they saw all the things they wanted from me about to be taken away. So that my parents brought me to California because they knew I could have those things here. And so there's no more than a small bit of irony in the fact that I became the Attorney General of the state that they brought me to, and we're fighting for democracy, the rule of law, rights and freedoms of our people. When my mom saw Mahmoud Khalil get taken, she texted me and said, "This feels like the Marcos dictatorship." That was chilling to me. From my 87-year-old mom who fought for the restoration of democracy for 14 years. And, I would go to protests and rallies and demonstrations with her. It took 14 years until the People Power Revolution brought back democracy to the Philippines in 1986 for her to say that. And that was in New York, where he was taken off the street. And so that's what this moment is. And to have masked folks who they're saying they're ICE, but you're not sure. They're removing their license plates before operations. They're taking people off the street and disappearing them to who knows where without communicating, allowing them to have access to their attorneys. It's chilling, and it's not who we are. And so, what can we do? We follow all the laws, including laws that empower states, like the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, laws that allow us to go to court to sue the most powerful man in our nation when he violates the Constitution and when he violates the law. And federalism does provide some limits here, not complete, but some limits. If we were going to sue a ICE agent for, say, excessive force or false arrest, or some other unlawful action. If we sue them in state court for or prosecute them for a crime, they could immediately bring the case to federal court, and they have immunities that they could proffer, including the supremacy clause immunity, which federal law enforcement agents have used in the past successfully to dismiss cases. Not always successful, but it's a powerful defense. Individual plaintiffs who are harmed, the man who was punched in the head while being arrested by ICE agents can sue under what's called the Bivens action. It's an action against a federal agent for damages for deprivation of his rights, his constitutional rights, his civil rights. So there are some mechanisms of accountability, and those should be explored, and those should be used when appropriate. If someone's rights are violated, their rights should be vindicated. That's what courts of law are for. But I do want to be clear-eyed, as A.G. Tong was, about the fact that there are limits and there are barriers when a local or state entity is bringing a criminal prosecution or even a civil action against a federal entity. There's the supremacy clause, there's preemption, there's the intergovernmental immunities clause, there's the supremacy clause immunity. So there are different aspects that we would have to wrestle with to bring a successful case.
And it's important that folks recall that over the course of American history, we will have wanted the federal government to exert its power over states or in states where civil rights were being violated, in Selma and elsewhere. Progressives can't simply suddenly adopt the narrowest of states' rights views that right-wingers were pushing for many years. I do want to ask a very specific question, though, on one of the things that's so unnerving to people, which is the masks that these federal agents are wearing to obscure their faces. there are ways that states can regulate conduct within their border. I would assume that without impinging on the prerogatives of federal law enforcement. Can states, and I know folks in California have considered this, can states just say that law enforcement can't be wearing masks or other costumes to disguise their identity in some way, or is that outside the reach of what states can do?
We have a legislator in California who's a friend of mine who I served with when I was in the legislature, who's proposing that right now and applying it to local law enforcement officers as well as state and federal. And it's an uphill battle for federal. The federal laws usually govern federal law enforcement, not states. And so there's also, I think, that the bully pulpit, and I think we should use that, and some AGs are, and more I think will, with respect to just saying that this is both bad for public safety and bad for officer safety. If you're not clearly marked and people don't know who you are, they might think that you are engaged in criminal activity, trying to harm them, trying to kidnap them. And they might defend themselves if they're exercising their Second Amendment right, for example. Or there's what we call deconfliction among different law enforcement agencies. When one law enforcement agency tells others about an operation that they're going to do, where they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, so they're not mistaken. And so there's no interruption or engagement or misunderstanding of what's happening. It's good for officer safety. And not to mention the traumatization of folks, but they will say what they've been saying, that it is to protect the identity of these agents so that they're not doxxed, so that people don't go to their home, so that they're not harmed. But I think we should be using all the tools in the toolbox. But again, there's definitely limits on whether and if and how a state can govern the practices and protocols of a federal law enforcement agency.
Some of the other questions that folks have sent in ask a pretty fundamental one, which is, what has surprised you about what you've seen, and what has not surprised you about what you've seen from the federal government and from the president and the presidency in this moment? And I'll start with you, Attorney General Tong.
In a negative sense, what has surprised me or what's been hard to appreciate is how much damage they're doing to the federal government, to Medicaid, Social Security, the IRS. It's clear that they just want to break stuff, and they want to break it so profoundly that we can't put it back together. If there were a different government, a different Congress, different president, that it would be so hard to get, through the Congress, a renovation, right, or a resupporting of these programs, our work on climate, for example. And I think that's what's hardest, I think, for me to take, is how much damage they're doing, even within their authority, and how profound that's going to be for programs that keep people safe, law enforcement, the FBI, right? What will we do if Kash Patel is successful in cutting the FBI's workforce in half? Half the number. What will New York do the next time somebody targets New York City for a terrorist attack, and we have half the manpower? It wasn't enough that first time. And I was on a train that got turned around in Pelham that morning. God bless. And my sister didn't go to World Trade 7 because she didn't feel like going to work that day. So we got lucky. But what will we do the next time it happens? The other thing and I will say this, that has surprised me in a good way, is it's been a mixed bag in the courts. We've been successful in some places. It's harder as we go up the chain. But I was in the Supreme Court a month ago on the birthright citizenship argument. Rob was supposed to be there, but his flight got all screwed up. And for 2.5 hours during that argument, I felt good about being an American again. Even though this order is so blatantly unconstitutional, You know, I happen to derive my citizenship from the 14th Amendment, not from my parents. I'm an American citizen by right of my birth on American soil. And for 2.5 hours, the justices, even the justices that I don't really agree with ever, most of them asked really important, tough, good questions. And the arguments were good. I obviously didn't think the government's argument was good, but our argument was really good. New Jersey's Solicitor General did a great job, and it worked. And I don't know how they're going to come out. It was a fairly technical question about nationwide injunctions, and not the ultimate merits question about whether he can ban birthright citizenship by a stroke of a pen. But it that for those 2.5 hours, it felt like the country was holding together, and that was good to see and be a part of.
I'd say that I haven't been surprised, but I've certainly still been shocked.
Yeah.
You know, it's what you expect, but when it actually happens, it's still, you know, it hits you hard. And I've been a little shocked at the scattershot and reckless attacks on really everyone. You know, the tariffs hurt, you know, the business folks that supported him, and the Office of Management and Budget memo cutting $3 trillion hurts the red states that really rely on a social service safety net. And you know, the NIH funding cuts hurt red states with universities that rely on it. So it's, you know, there's enough for everyone to be upset about who are facing the attacks. But the part that remains shocking is, you know, the rationalization of the supporters who will say, you know, even though I'm getting hurt by this, it's still okay. He's still great. It's, you know, it's all good. The hypocrisy has been shocking. The claim, for example, that we're going to go after violent undocumented immigrants, and they're going after, you know, day one, children with U.S. citizenship because of their birthright, going at, you know, deporting a 2-year-old kid, you know, detaining a 9-month pregnant woman, going after farm workers, you know, literally chasing them through the fields, or people at restaurants, you know, who are working hard, paying their taxes, raising their families. So the hypocrisy has been shocking and painful. The way that they talk has been shocking. It's like a 24-hour campaign, culture wars all the time. You know, talking about social engineering and the Green New Deal, and you know, as you mentioned, Secretary Noem coming to my state and saying, "I'm here to liberate LA from the socialist mayor and governor." Like who talks like that? It's so unbecoming. And some of the statements by the vice president, by Speaker Johnson, around the role of courts and the role of courts vis-a-vis the executive branch are dangerous. And I worry that they're socializing an idea for an action that or actions that might come. So, but one thing I'll just recognize is that the volume and the speed of their actions have been high, more than Trump 1.0 by a lot. We're on pace to have the number of lawsuits we had in Trump 1.0 in half the time. So they're breaking the law, violating the Constitution at double the pace. And so not surprising, but still shocking if you believe in the core principles that make America what it is. If you believe in decency and believe in a nation for all of us, where we can all have our claim of the American dream. It's us moving exactly the wrong way. But I'll end by saying, one, I agree with A.G. Tong about the U.S. Supreme Court argument. I listened to it, and the debate was affirming. They were talking about the law and the facts in the way that you would hope in a court, even if they don't come out the way that we want on some of the issues. It was thoughtful. It was deliberate. There was listening. It was open-minded, and at times, I think there's a couple members of the court that are pre-decided and will be difficult to reach. But that's what we are at our best. We talk about our issues. We're thoughtful about them. We think about the push and pull, the balance, the different principles and tension, and we come to a thoughtful place. And I'll also end by saying I have and our AGs have a ton of energy, a ton of gas in the tank. We've been busy. Our staff have had sleepless nights. We've been suing at double the pace as Trump 1.0, and we're ready for more. Bring it. We're ready. You're not allowed to break the law. You're not allowed to violate the Constitution. There's no such thing as flooding the zone and having things slip through. Anytime and every time you break the law, hurt our states, we will sue you. We will take you to court. And if the past is an indicator of the present, most of the time we will win and we will block you and we will stop you. And that continues to be true.
Yeah, as I've said a number of times, he can try to flood the zone. We're just going to flood it right back. It's a little too damn hot right now, which is why I'm in my polo. So, so maybe
One
a little
one of
cooler would be better.
the ways that the rule of law can be upheld and that we are flooding back is, as you both know, when these cases are in the courts, very often arguments can be brought in outside the arguments made by the parties, whether the parties are the states or other private litigants. At the Brennan Center, for example, the role we are playing is we're very rarely the ones going into court. Sometimes we brought a case challenging President Trump's executive order purporting to take personal control of the electoral system in the United States. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters, we won a nationwide injunction against the very significant parts of that. But most of those cases have been brought by others. Where we come in, because we are largely a think tank as well as a legal advocacy group, is through helping to pull together, to coordinate, to write, to motivate the friend of the court briefs. And as you both know, this Greek chorus of voices can be very important in these big constitutional cases. We've got a constitutional crisis litigation project, as we grandly call it. And we're working with others on dozens of briefs, from elected officials, from conservatives, from historians looking at what the true original intent was on something like birthright citizenship, or the ability of presidents to simply stop spending money if they don't feel like it. And so this is going to be an important part, I think, of this flotilla of cases that are headed to the Supreme Court that will define the shape of presidential power and the role of the federal government versus and vis-a-vis the states in this moment. A final question for both of you. At this moment, people are feeling anxious, they're feeling angry, they're quite energized. We saw that in large and growing numbers in the No Kings rallies, but in every other way. What gives you hope at this moment? And what can people do to stand up for the Constitution?
I'll tell you what gives me hope. What gives me hope is all of you. What gives me hope is I work with Rob every day and his team, and that he and I and others like us get to do this work. My parents came to Bloomfield, Connecticut, of all places. They met in a Chinese restaurant, and I grew up in a Chinese restaurant. I'm nobody, right? I'm the son of two immigrants and the grandson and son of refugees who ran for their lives, and they ended up, of all places, in Connecticut. And when I was born, I became the first American citizen in my immediate family by right of my birth in Hartford Hospital on American soil by operation of the 14th Amendment. And I worked side by side with my parents in our family's Chinese restaurant when I was a kid. And it wasn't easy. It was hard. There was a lot of sweat, blood, tears, sacrifice. I saw my parents and people who worked there suffer 7 days a week, 12 to 15 hours a day. But in one generation, I went from that hot Chinese restaurant kitchen to being the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut. And there are kids in Connecticut and California, from here to there, living this truth right now, no matter what Donald Trump does. They're fighting for every inch. Their parents are fighting for every inch, and they're going to make it if we fight for them.
100%. And, I feel the same way. A brown boy from another country brought here by parents fleeing a dictator, who believed in the American dream and the California dream, who sent me to great California public schools, who told me if I work hard enough, I can go to college. If I dream big enough, I can go to law school, and always reminded me to serve and help others. And I know the California and American dream are alive and well because I'm living mine. And sometimes I can barely believe I'm the Attorney General of California, and I will confess to you that sometimes I secretly go on my website at California DOJ to see if my name and my image are really there. And I get very, very excited when I see it because it means we can keep doing the great work that we're doing. I'm proud to work with AG Tong and all the AGs who their courage is inspiring. Their camaraderie gives me energy and inspiration to do more and fight harder. And but in the end, the thing that gives me hope is the goodness and the decency of the American people broadly, and the fact that the people in our democracy, as is its design, by design, will always have the first and the last word. That the bosses of Mr. Trump are not his billionaire buddies or the greedy corporations. They are you and me and us. And we decide what happens next. And there's a lot of chapter to write in the story of America, the story of California, and we're going to write it. So we should not be hopeless because we're not helpless. We have power. We have agency. We can make tomorrow more fair and more just than today, but we have to stay engaged. We have to stay enraged. We can never accept the unacceptable or normalize what is so abnormal. We need to fight, and we need to push, and we need to show the courage that I know all the folks watching have shown. We need more. We need as you've heard this before, we need our courts where we find justice and we block unlawful actions. We need crowds where people show up and show out and speak up and speak out and talk about what we will accept and what we will not accept. And we need courage. And it sounds obvious, but not everyone has shown it. And this is a moment that will test us. We have law firms, in my own profession, who did not show courage, who did the opposite, who caved, who acquiesced, who capitulated when their rights were being violated. Instead of fighting, it's what they do every day. They fight for their clients. And in the adversarial system, they wouldn't fight for themselves, but others have. So if we continue with courts, crowds, courage, people power, which is the most potent power that there is, it will be difficult. I'm clear-eyed about that. We will have challenges. I know we will. But it's not whether we have challenges, it's what we do in response. And if we fight and if we push, I know we will prevail, and that gives me hope.
Wow, our hour is up, and I have to tell you, I think I can speak for everybody on this call that you are the reason we have hope, and your story, both of your stories, are why what America is about and what America should be about. And hearing from you tonight leaves me filled with gratitude and filled with love for our country, and hoping we can keep it the country that we want it to be. So thank you, AG Tong and AG Bonta and Michael, for being with us tonight. And thank all of you for joining us in the Big Tent.